So I was going to title today's sermon, Clinging to Wonder in the Face of Suffering, but that sounded like a subtitle of a paper I would have written in seminary. And titling it Mary Oliver, Martin Luther King, and Anne Frank Walk into a Bar sounded a little too irreverent, setting up a joke without a punchline that I could think of. So instead, I will entitle this sermon, A Morning with Mary Oliver, Martin Luther King Jr., and Anne Frank. Mary Oliver, because today is her feast day, as I have declared it such. Martin Luther King Jr., because of the holiday tomorrow celebrating his birth, which was actually 2 days ago. And Anne Frank, because while she was one who experienced one of the chief horrors in human history, the Holocaust, somehow she did not lose her sense of wonder. You see, that is one of the great threats of immense evil, of violence, terror, warfare, insurrection. It not only threatens our bodies, our cities, our buildings, but it can crush the spirit, and it threatens our perception of wonder. It is hard to see the shimmering sun in the midst of warfare. Great evil and violence, like what we saw in the siege on our nation's capital, has the potential to overwhelm the soul and overcome our sense of grounding in the peace of Christ, who is the ground of our being. In the baptismal rite, after someone is baptized, the priest prays a prayer which ends, "Give her an inquiring and discerning heart, the courage to will and to persevere, a spirit to know you and to love you, and the gift of joy and wonder in all your works." That joy and wonder is so evident in Mary Oliver's writing. Yet Mary Oliver was no stranger to suffering, and some of the woes and challenges of her life creep through in her writing. She faced the challenges of growing up gay in the rural Midwest in the first half of the 20th century. She experienced the death of her longtime partner, Molly Malone Cook. She fought a diagnosis of lung cancer, pushing it into remission, grieved the death of her dog and companion, Percy, and eventually succumbed to lymphoma 2 years ago today. Through her life, though, and even up until her death, she held on to that gift of joy and wonder in all God's works. Anne Frank is another person who comes to mind when I think of wonder in the face of suffering. She experienced one of the greatest horrors in human history, the Holocaust, but somehow she never lost the gift of wonder. Anne Frank once wrote, "I don't think of all the misery, but of the beauty that still remains. My advice is, go outside to the fields, enjoy nature in the sunshine. Go out and try to recapture happiness in yourself and in God. Think of all the beauty that is still left in and around you, and be happy." I think Anne and Mary would have gotten along quite well had they met. And surely now they are in a heavenly field somewhere comparing notes on life, love, and wonder. These words from Anne Frank are striking because they come from someone who faced the terrors of the Holocaust firsthand, yet did not lose her belief in the power of beauty. She wrote, "I've found that there is always some beauty left in nature, sunshine, freedom, in yourself. These can all help you." And she did not hole up in the hidden annex in the midst of the horrors and forsake humanity in her heart, but rather she held on to a belief in the potential of deep good at the core of humanity. Anne Frank wrote, It is really a wonder that I haven't dropped my ideals, because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yet I keep them, because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. The miracle of Anne Frank is that she clung to her gift of wonder in the face of such deep suffering. Tomorrow is the civic holiday in which we remember Martin Luther King Jr., another saint who was no stranger to suffering. A leader in the civil rights movement, arrested almost 30 times for his civil rights work, he faced violent attacks and bomb threats which weren't always just threats. Yet King was not overcome by the darkness of the world. There is indeed a great deal of darkness in this world and a huge measure of suffering that accompanies such darkness. We surely see it in our own day. And there is joy and beauty and wonder. Brother Curtis Almquist, an Episcopal monk of the Massachusetts-based Society of St. John the Evangelist, once wrote, "Joy is a mystery. It is as mysterious as our suffering, and I think it is as boundless as our suffering. Somehow in God's economy, the one is creating space for the other." I'm reminded in my heart of St. Paul's words, "Do not be overcome by evil." It is my prayer that in the face of deep darkness and suffering, that we may look for the light of Christ, that we may be the light of Christ. Mary's poetry opens us to that childlike wonder, to the beauty in all God's creation. It reminds us that even in the midst of the chaos of this world, there are everyday miracles and wonders which can lighten our soul. If I spent every hour of every day contemplating the pain of the world, the suffering, the hunger, the violence, the hatred, the racism, the gift of joy and wonder, pray for me in baptism, would be hard for me to hold on to. We must cling to wonder in the face of suffering. This is necessary daily to feed our soul, to remember the resilience and power of life, and of love, and of hope. Mary Oliver is a prophet of our own day who opens our eyes to that everyday wonder around us. As the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." In the midst of the challenges we face, may we fill ourselves with light, with love, with wonder. These will be the instruments that we use to drive out the looming darkness and hatred in the world. For your soul, every day, seek beauty. Sit outside. Watch the birds. Spend time with children. Read a poem. And so with such advice, it is only fitting that I end with a poem and give Mary Oliver the final word. This is a poem of her love affair with the world. A poem which starts off seeming to speak of romantic love, but which expands line by line and concludes with a cosmic embrace. Of Love by Mary Oliver. I have been in love more times than one, thank the Lord. Sometimes it was lasting, whether active or not. Sometimes it was all but ephemeral, maybe only an afternoon, but not less real for that. They stay in my mind, these beautiful people, or anyway, beautiful people to me, of which there are so many. You and you and you, whom I had the fortune to meet, or maybe missed. Love, love, love. It was the core of my life, from which, of course, comes the word for the heart. And oh, have I mentioned that some of them were men, and some were women, and some, now carry my revelation with you, were trees, or places, or music flying above the names of their makers, or clouds, or the sun, which was the first and the best, the most loyal for certain, who looked so faithfully into my eyes every morning. So I imagine such love of the world, its fervency, its shining, its innocence and hunger to give of itself. I imagine this is how it began. Amen.